Hi, everybody. This is Mary Hart, and I am at my farm in Gravel Switch, Kentucky today, and I'm going to be talking to you about the good, the bad, and the ugly of private lending. And I'm going to share my screen with a slideshow here in a few minutes, but before I do that, let me just tell you a little bit about myself so you know why I am able to present on this topic. I am a retired attorney, but I've been a real estate investor since about 2003. And I think I did my first private loan in about 2004. And I've done a number of them since then. So over the last 18 years, I've done quite a few. I don't even know how many, maybe 50, not sure. I also have drafted paperwork for my clients in the private loan space, have reviewed a lot of documents, have consulted with clients. So I've been involved in the private lending space for quite a while, and I teach on this topic around the country. So that's who I am and why I'm here talking to you today. Let's see if I can get my screen to share, and we'll start the slideshow. Just a minute, I'm not the best at all this stuff. So let's see if we can start the slideshow, play it from the beginning. So we've talked about the topic, and there's my contact information if you need to reach me. And I think you'll probably get these slides, but I'll give you a second just to write that down. maryhartcba@gmail.com. That CBA, by the way, stands for Conceive, Believe, and Achieve, based on the Napoleon Hill concept that anything the mind can conceive and believe it can achieve. So let's keep that in mind as we go forward today. Want to talk to you about gratitude. I'm very thankful for these people on this screen. Tracy and Fred, thank you so much for inviting me again to speak at Cashflow Expo. Always appreciate you guys inviting me, and I'd love to help out, so thank you. Quincy Long runs Quest Trust, and he has taught me a lot about self-directed IRA investing over the years. Both Dykes Bodiford and Dave Steck have taught me so much about private lending over the years, and they have both been an influence of these slides, and I want to thank them specifically for allowing me to use some of their materials. All right, let's move on. Private lending, what is it? You guys probably know this, but it's when individuals lend their own money or someone else's money to investors, generally speaking, and secure that loan with a mortgage against real estate. You can use your money, you can use your self-directed IRA money, you can use other people's money, either as a wrap lender or co-loaning with other people. And we'll talk about that later, what those two things mean. So private lending, when you make a loan and you take a mortgage against property, that gives you some underlying security. And the loan, whether depending on how it's structured, will either pay you interest and points, or some equity share in the property. So the idea is that you're loaning money for profit, and your loan is being secured by the property as collateral through a mortgage or a deed of trust. And in many ways, as you'll see in some of our slides later, this is less risky than actually owning the property yourself. So we get to have control over some of the deal and take a profit off it without being an owner on title, which I personally enjoy. So let's talk about where private lending fits in the flipper model, the rehab model. And you've probably seen or heard this before, the 6 F's of real estate investing. You have to find it, figure it, do all the numbers, fund it, figure out how to pay for it, fix the property, fill it up with tenants or flip it. And all of those 6 F's, except the fund it, require an active participation. It's a job. And funding it as a private lender is really the only one that is more passive. And it's one of the reasons I really, really enjoy private lending. And we'll talk more about that as we go forward in these slides. But so I'm not going to go through all of these. I just want to show you some of the slides that all the work you have to do if you find it, figure it, fix it, fill it, flip it. And you'll probably have access to these slides. You can go back and look at them. But you can see if you find it, you have to do all these things to find it. If you're figuring it, you've got to run all these numbers, and that's not too bad, but you still have to know your numbers and know how to calculate them. If you're fixing it, obviously that's a lot of work to fix it. The rehabbers are spending, sometimes hundreds of hours on a property. So that's a lot of work. Fill it, you've got to find the tenants, screen the tenants, do background checks, all of that stuff, or you've got to vet and hire a property manager. And that makes it a little more passive, but you still have to manage the manager, so to speak. Flip it. Obviously, if you're going to sell it, there's a lot to do to sell it. So here's some of the list of things you have to do. And when you're the flipper, by the way, who gets paid last? You do. Who gets paid ahead of you? the contractor, if it's not you, the contractor who you've hired to do the work, the title company who's doing the closing and doing the title search, the escrow agent or the attorney's office, the realtor, the lender. If there's enough money in the deal, then you'll get paid, but the flipper gets paid last. Now, the reward for that is that sometimes the raw dollar amounts are bigger than what some of these other people get paid, say the lender, but the risk is bigger and the time consumption is bigger and greater. And we'll see some of that in some examples down the line. But anyway, that's why I'm not the flipper. I don't want to spend all that active time. I don't want to be the person who takes the risk to get paid last. I would rather have maybe less reward in terms of actual dollars and less brain damage and less time in the deal. So here we are. You could save some brain damage by just funding it. So what do you do if you fund it? You need to vet the borrower, and you see some of the things I've talked about there. Make sure they have some experience, make sure they have integrity. That's huge in this space. Their financial situation. Until they become a repeat borrower from you, you really need to know what their financial situation is. If they get in trouble, do they have any ability to repay you, to refinance out something else and get some money? Do they have an income or a cash flow that they can pay your monthly interest payments while they're waiting for the house to get finished and sold? So we're going to vet the borrower. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about that. When you're vetting the borrower, sometimes the questions you ask are not ones you think about. Like my friend Dave Steck, he'll ask his borrowers, have you ever gotten any tickets, like parking tickets or anything? And he had one borrower who said, well, yeah, I've gotten a lot of tickets for not wearing my seatbelt. And Dave said, well, why don't you wear your seatbelt? And he says, well, I just don't like rules. I'm not going to follow the rule just because somebody told me I have to. What do you think happened to that loan? Dave didn't fund it, right? Because we have rules as lenders. Borrowers have to follow our rules. And if we've got someone who admits up front that they are not rule followers, they don't like to follow rules, why would we give them our money to invest with them? So, you can ask questions about them, their personality, their integrity. You can ask for references, talk to people they've worked with before, certainly ask for their experience. I do something called an experience verification worksheet if it's a new borrower, and I want them to show me the deals they did in the last 12 months. I want to know the address of the property, how much they paid for the property, how much they paid to rehab the property, when they sold it, what they sold it for, and how they got their investors paid back. And I want to do that, one, to see if they'll follow my request and actually answer it. But two, those are things I can go check on the public record. Did they buy and close in the entity they said they bought and closed in? Do the numbers match up to what they told me? Does the timeline match up to what they told me? I want to make sure that people are telling me the truth. Okay, so that's just part of vetting the borrower. You want to vet the deal for general value of the home, the marketability. Can you sell it if you have to take it back? Can you rent it? So look at the deal itself. And then you want to make sure that you have security for your loan. I personally don't like to loan more than 65 to 70% of the after repaired value of the property, the value it will sell for after the repairs, unless there is a really good story and a really good reason. And the reason for that is I want to keep my loan to value, my LTV, that ratio at 65 or 70% or less, so that I have a built-in 35 or 30% equity cushion in case I have to take that house back. I haven't loaned up to the very last dollar of that house. I want to make sure that I have some cushion. How do you make money as a private lender? There are a number of ways, and we'll see some more specific examples in a minute, but you can make money by points, like loan origination fees. Sometimes there'll be 1 to 3. Sometimes I've seen 5 points, and a point is just 1% of the loan value. So you can make money on day one on points. You can either get the points paid at the time you loan the money or paid on the back end. And there are different reasons for doing it different ways. You can make money every month by getting an interest payment. You can make money when it closes. If you're doing a profit share, you're splitting the profit in the property. And then because this is a repeatable, scalable business, you can just rinse and repeat. And you have a fairly passive cash flow from your lending portfolio. There's some work, but it's not as active as some of the other stuff. So what are my favorite reasons for doing private lending? I think it can generate higher returns with less risk than other asset classes. Certainly, like my average return is 10 to 18%. annualized on private lending, whereas, my stocks, I don't know what the return is going to be. Sometimes it's nothing. Sometimes they go down. Sometimes I have a better year, but it's usually not consistently 10, 12, 15%. There's a lot of opportunity as a lender because there are a lot of investors out there looking for dollars to fund their deals. And so, in fact, that favorable investor to lender ratio, I like, where there are fewer lenders than there are investors. So you can usually find a deal, somebody who needs money to finish their deal. And if you know what you're doing and you pay attention and you vet the situation right and you have the right paperwork and you do things right, then your win-loss ratio can be unmatched, meaning that, well, let's put it this way. I've been doing private lending since 2004. I've never lost a dime. I've never had to take property back. I've come close a couple of times, but what saved me in the end was my paperwork was rock solid. I knew the deal, I knew the numbers, I knew what was going on. So that win-loss ratio is great if you do things right. And lending services the number one need in real estate. What do people need if they're going to do a deal? They need money. They need funding to buy the property, to fix up the property. So that's what we provide, and that's why it's a number one service. And this bottom line, she who has the gold makes the rules. That's kind of a tongue-in-cheek joke, but I think as the lender, you do want to make sure that the terms are favorable to you, but it's not, I like a win-win situation. So I'm not going to do a deal unless the terms are favorable for the borrower as well. We want everybody to make money in this deal. And if both borrower and the lender cannot make money, nor the lender should do that deal if both sides can't make money. And so I always let my borrowers tell me the terms they would like to have. And if that works for me, which it usually does, then I'll just agree to them. I don't have set parameters because I want to make sure that every deal works for the borrower as well as for myself. So they've run their numbers. They know what they can afford. I ask them for the proposed terms, and then I decide if I can live with those terms or not. If I feel like I need something different, I'll go back to the borrower and say, hey, I'm not quite getting the yield that I'm hoping for. Do you have it in your budget to pay me another point or go up 1% in the interest or whatever it is? And the answer will either be yes or no, right? So we want a win-win. Continuing with why I like this, this is not a job. You have some things that you have to do to protect yourself. But once you've done those initial steps, it's usually kind of a set it and forget it thing. You're just making sure your monthly interest check is coming in, checking on the progress of the property now and then. But otherwise, it's fairly passive. And that makes it a great investment for your self-directed IRA, where you really can't be involved in the transaction beyond directing the purchase of the asset, which in this case would be a promissory note. It's also a good business for repeat and referral. So you start working with a good flipper and they do multiple properties a year. If you have a good relationship and you guys work well together, you've got a built-in not partner, that's not the right word legally, but you've got a built-in borrower, they've got a built-in lender. You can just keep sourcing their, funding their deals as they source them. And it's a good repeat and referral business. You also can leverage other people's money, other people's time, and other people's effort. So I like that about it too. And you'll see some examples in a little while about how you can, if you have small dollars, you don't have enough to lend yourself, how you can either wrap other people's money or co-lend with them and still make a really good return on your money. I like lending because you've got this monthly check coming in. So if I had 5 loans out there, I've got 5 interest checks coming in every month, and it's sustainable, it's leverageable, and it's recurring. So I personally think private lending is great. One of my favorite things about it is I think the risk mitigation is really good. We talked about this earlier, who gets paid first and who gets paid last. I think the lender's money is safer than the borrower, which is usually the flipper, because if the deal loses money, the flipper is going to lose before I lose as the lender. And if I've only loaned at 65 to 70% of loan to value ratio, I have some built-in equity, 30 to 35% equity. And so I've got a cushion of protection. And I like to loan in first lien position with rare exception. And I'll go over a couple of those in a minute. But first lien position means that I'm first in line to take that house back if the borrower stops paying and we can't work something out. So I'm ahead of everybody else in the recorder's office, and I can foreclose on that property take it back if necessary. Now, I've never had to do that, but I would say in pretty much every case, every loan, had I had to take the property back, I would have made more money than I did just loaning. So that I don't want to take the property back. I want it to be a win-win for everybody, but I'm protecting myself in the event the borrower chooses not to repay me or can't repay me. Something goes wrong. That does happen. And so anyway, that risk mitigation is a big factor for me. This is one of my favorite parts, the effort to return ratio. And thank you, Dave Steck, for that term, the ERR. So whose effort to return ratio is better in a private lending situation? The active investor, i.e. the flipper, or the passive investor, the lender? So let's take this example, and it's an old example, so we can get this type of interest rate, but I'm seeing loans that are usually a little bit higher. But let's take this as an example. So we've got the active investor, the flipper. She finds a price that's, finds the property that the purchase price is $70,000. And she knows there's going to be some rehab costs of $10,000 involved. It's going to be about $1,000 worth of holding costs, insurance and property taxes during the period of time in which they're flipping it. And the capital cost, that's supposed to be in the other line. Forget the capital cost that goes under private investor. The sales cost, which is the ratio, the commission to the real estate agent, all that comes off. So in my example, the active investor, after purchasing the property, spending, in my example, 100 hours to fix it up, has a net profit of $18,100. But if you divide that by the 100 hours they spent in it, you've got a profit per hour of only $181 an hour. Now let's go over to the right-hand column and look at the lender. Let's assume this is all the lender's money. So just take that whole capital cost out of the equation. If I've got this passive investor, AKA lender, they loan the $80,000, the purchase price and the rehab, and they get 3 points on that deal. That's a check for, they're loaning the $70,000, the flipper funds the $10,000. So the lender loans $70,000, they get 3 points up front, that's $2,100. They get an interest rate of 12%. Let's assume this is a 6-month loan. That would be $4,200 in interest. When the house sells at $100,000 and the lender gets paid off, they keep the whole $6,300 before taxes. So that's a net profit of $6,300, but they've probably only got about 10 hours or less in the deal. I think it's probably more like 2 hours, but let's be conservative and say it's 10 hours. Their profit is $630 an hour versus the flippers of $181 an hour. Now, I don't know about you, but I would rather make $630 an hour than $181 an hour. And I'll tell you a good story on an effort to return ratio for me. This was one of a loan that I did. And I got an email from my friend Dave Steck, who emailed a number of us. And he said, hey, I've got a hair on fire deal to buy a portfolio of houses. But the only catch is I've got to come up with $500,000 today. I don't have time to do the paperwork. I can give you absolutely no security. My company will have security, but I can't give you security. I don't even have the time to sign the promissory note. Will you send me money? Well, because of my relationship with Dave, and I've never done this before or since, I was on vacation in Arizona, and I called my bank and had them wire $100,000 to Dave that afternoon. Knowing Dave, I didn't do as much due diligence as I normally do, but I knew his experience. I'd been in a mastermind with him for years at this point, and so I trusted him. My time in that deal was probably about, let's call it 30 minutes. I think it was more like 20 minutes. I invested $100,000. 88 days later, I got $18,000 back. Okay, so that's an 18% return if I only flip that money once a year. But let's say it came back in 88 days, that's less than 3 months. So let's say I flipped that same 100,000 3 more times that year. My return would be 18 times 4. That's huge. What is that, 72 or something? Huge return. So that's my effort to return ratio. I'm getting a massive return for very little time spent on these private loans. It does take some time, but just not as much as the flippers. So we go back to the need of the real estate investors. Real estate investors who are flipping houses need money. Is real estate investing ever going away? Probably not. There will always be people who will be renovating and rehabbing houses, whether that's to flip or to hold as rentals, which, by the way, I've done a lot of those for people where I fund the purchase and or the rehab. and the borrower fixes it up, puts a tenant in the property, seasons that tenant for a year, and then at the end of a year, refinances with a bank and pays me out. So it doesn't always have to be a flip. It can be for a long-term rental as well. So how can we service the number one need in real estate? Private lending. But wait, it gets even better. What if you could do it without paying taxes on the interest and points that you're making, or the profit share? Let's talk about that. So let's talk first about how devastating taxes can be to your money. So you guys have heard about the magic penny example, maybe, I'm not sure. But if I gave you a penny, the magic penny, and it doubled every single day for 30 days, what would the amount of money be at the end of 30 days? Well, if you're doing it with your own personal money and you're paying taxes at 28%, then at the end of that 30 days, that penny would be worth over $67,000. That's a lot of money. Went from 1 penny to $67,000 in 30 days. I'd take that deal any day. But it gets better. What if I could eliminate the tax drag and get rid of paying that 28% on that money every day when it doubles? Let's see the next slide. If a penny doubles every day and there are no taxes at the end of 30 days, it's worth over $5.3 million. Now, when I first saw this example, I didn't believe it, so I did the math. If you don't believe me, I encourage you to do the math. So if we've got a penny that can go from 67,000 in 30 days to 5.3 million in 30 days, and the only thing we did different was eliminate 28% in taxes that we paid every time it doubled, why wouldn't we try to do as much of our private lending in a tax-free environment? How do we do that? We're going to try to lend through our self-directed IRA, SDIRA. That is an IRA account. You can do it through a 401k as well, but let's call it a self-directed IRA that you have set up with a custodian like Quest Trust Company or somebody like that. And you are directing your custodian to invest in a promissory note. So your IRA is loaning the money to the borrower. And every time you get a payment, it comes back into your IRA completely free of income taxes. If it's a traditional IRA, it comes in tax-free, and then at one day you'll have to pay the taxes when you take the money out. But if it is a Roth IRA, that interest gets paid into your IRA tax-free, and it remains tax-free forever. So think about that when you're deciding where to loan money from if you're doing private lending. All right, so I'm gonna give you a couple of quick examples of a $70,000 loan outside of your IRA. 12% interest for 6 months is $8,400. 3 points is $2,100. I might have done that right. It might be $4,200 for 6 months. Did I do that math wrong? Well, anyway, do the math yourself because I'm looking at it going, I'm not sure I did that right. In any event, do the math and do the example of before with taxes at 28% or whatever your tax bracket is, and without. And I'm going to fly through these slides because I think I did the math wrong. But let's see if the math was right, then you can see the difference between total remaining after taxes outside the IRA was $7,560. So maybe it was a 12-month loan if I don't have my math right, but $7,560 after taxes outside of my IRA, assuming taxes are 28%, or the total amount, $10,500 remaining after taxes, because if it's in my IRA, I'm not paying taxes. So if you see that savings, that's $2,940 on that example. And how many times are you repeating that? And then you could take that money and loan it, and it just compounds. One of the most powerful forces in the world is avoiding taxes and the compounding interest that you can get. All right. So this is just numbers. If you had a bigger loan, I'm not going to go through it. You can look at the slides. I think you'll probably get them. So let's talk about how private lenders actually make money. You're trying to maximize one or two things. You're trying to maximize yield in every situation. And some people get confused and think yield is the same thing as the interest rate. It is not. Yield is the annualized rate of return on your money. And you calculate that by taking the amount of money that comes back to you in interest and points and divide that by the total investment you made in the loan. Get that number and then multiply it by how many times a year you can turn that money over. For instance, if I did a loan, if I loaned out $100,000, that's my total investment, and I earned a 10% return, I earned $10,000 of revenue, then my return is 10%. But let's say I did that every 3 months. So I could take that 10% and multiply it by 4 quarters, 4 times. My yield annualized is now 40%. So that velocity of money, how many times you can turn over those same dollars within a year can make a dramatic difference in your yield. So if I loaned 100,000 at 10% for 12 months, one 12-month loan, my return is just 10%, assuming no points. If I had 2 6-month loans, my 10% yield just went up to 20%. See, if I do that same loan 3 times, it's 30%. And if I do it 4 times, it's 40%, all on that same $100,000. So hopefully that makes sense to you guys, because I know I'm going kind of fast to get through all the slides. But so we want to maximize the yield, and we're looking at it by how much interest. So our interest rate is important. The number of points we're getting on a loan is important. Any equity share is important. And the velocity of money, how many times we can turn that over in a year, is important. So we want to maximize that yield. If you're using other people's money, you want to maximize the spread. And the spread is the amount that you're making from what you charge the borrower minus the amount you're paying for other people's money. So in my example above, if I made 10%, $10,000, but I had to pay an underlying lender 8%, I'm only making that 2% spread, right? So I would not make $10,000, I'd make $2,000. But it's not my money, it's somebody else's money. So keep in mind, yield and spread, very important. All right, other ways that private lenders can make money, and let me be transparent here. I don't charge pretty much any of these. I'll charge points and interest rate, but I don't charge an occasional extension fee. I don't charge a due diligence fee. I don't charge a payoff demand fee. I don't charge, sometimes I've done an escalator if it's an equity share, and I can explain that a little bit. But, be careful, by the way, if you're a borrower, make sure that all these fees are disclosed to you up front, because you can think you're just paying 10% and 2 points, and then the payoff demand comes, and your lender has tacked on a whole bunch of fees. So just, if you're the borrower, ask about these fees. If you're the lender, look at this list of fees and you decide what you feel right charging and what you don't want to charge. I want it to be a win-win for everybody. So I'm going to charge a viable interest rate and points, and I'm not going to load up on these miscellaneous fees. But that's just me. You can do it the way you want to. All right. So private lending, perfect wealth accumulator. Let's talk about that. You can read this list, but it's passive relatively. You can make it recurring. It's not a job job. You can use your money. You can use your self-directed IRA money. You can use other people's money, and other people's money, you can either co-lend with other people. You can wrap somebody else's money, and we'll show you an example of that later. You can set up a fund, and if you have more experience, and literally raise money through other investors to use to make loans. There are several friends of mine that do that. You can make some pretty extraordinary yields. You control the risk. You're in the lowest position of risk of anyone in the deal, in my opinion. You can forecast your income, because assuming everything is paid as it's supposed to, you can set a predetermined yield and forecast what your income is going to be. You've got cash flow. It's easy to understand. It's replicable, scalable. If it's outside your IRA, it's a little hard to do in your IRA. And you can do it really from anywhere. We call it a backpack business. You have a computer or a smartphone, an internet, a printer. You can do it just about anywhere. Printer, scanner, DocuSign serves the #1 need in real estate, and it can be done on vacation. So I think it's a great way to be an investor. So let's talk about what you need to know to be a private lender and to do it right, because it is critical to understand the process and what you need to do to protect yourself as a lender. You want to make sure you understand the transaction, you control the transaction in terms of your piece of it. And so you do not want to do a deal if you don't understand the deal. If the borrower cannot explain it to you, explain what the deal is, why it's good for the borrower and why it's good for you. If the borrower has insufficient income to pay you for a month or two of interest, or the whole interest during the loan before they flip it or refinance it, you have to make sure that there is some skin in the game, that they have the ability to repay you. If the property cannot be valued properly, it's sort of a one-off, weird, quirky deal. You have no idea what the comps are. There are no comps. Be very careful about that. Don't ever do a deal without using a third-party escrow or title agent, closing attorney, something like that. Never, ever, 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 triple exclamation point, wire your money directly to a borrower. It must go through a title company, closing agent, attorney's office, something through their trust account and not dispersed to the borrower until all the documents are signed, any payoffs have been made for judgments or liens, things like that. Very, very important. I've seen a lot of people, not a lot of people, some people lose their shirt because they wired the money directly to the borrower and had absolutely no protection that way. So be careful. Don't do a deal if there's not property insurance. And I like a lender's title insurance policy. Be very careful. And I don't ever do these types of loans on owner occupied property, because then you get into the Dodd-Frank and the SAFE Act, and you have to be very careful to meet certain laws and regulations if you're loaning on property that is occupied by the borrower as their primary residence. And don't do the deal if your loan is going to be unsecured. People have asked me, I don't do it. I've had people ask me to do business loans and the security is their business. Well, in a lot of cases, that business is just someone's goodwill. So if they walk away, where's the inherent value in the business? What is my collateral? Nothing. Maybe there's some equipment, maybe there's a pickup truck or some materials, but that can go away in a heartbeat too. So I like my loans secured by real estate and only real estate. All right, so again, be comfortable with the deal, the collateral, and the borrower. You want a long-term relationship with your borrower so that you can rinse and repeat this. And so you want to make sure you maintain that excellent relationship. Sometimes things do go south, even with someone you've been working with for years. And in that case, the relationship will obviously sour, but if you're protected with your paperwork, you will get your money back, maybe even more than you have in the deal. But if that doesn't go south, you want to make sure that you keep an excellent relationship so you can keep doing this over and over, rinse and repeat. Your collateral, the house that's serving as security, should be simple and homogeneous, meaning it's very easy to sell. It's like most of the properties around in that neighborhood. It's not some weird castle on the side of the road. It's not some really quirky thing that you'll have a very small audience as a buyer. You want it to be homogeneous. And as I said earlier, I think I said it, if the borrower cannot explain the deal, if the borrower doesn't understand it and they cannot explain it to you, don't fund the deal. The borrower has to understand the deal and be able to articulate why it's a good deal to the borrower and the lender. And you need to verify the value of your collateral, because if your collateral is not worth what you think it is, you're not protected the way you think you are, right? So rule number one, it's your money or yours and an underlying investor. So you need to trust but verify everything. And actually, I would say verify and then trust these days. You know, it's you want to trust people, but until you've worked with them for a while, definitely verify everything the borrower tells you before you trust. 6 due diligence areas when you're vetting these deals. You're going to look at the borrower. We've talked about this, the borrower's income, the location of the collateral, the value of the collateral, the market conditions. If you had to take that house back, what are your exit strategies? If you had to foreclose, what would it cost to foreclose? Could you sell the house, rent the house, turn it into an Airbnb, flip it to another investor for a slight fee over and above what you're owed, or just to get your money back? You know, what could you do? What's your exit strategy? Rule number 2, sadly, borrowers often can be overly optimistic. And even if they believe the story themselves, it's not always the accurate story. They will tell you what you want to hear to get the deal done. Not every borrower. There's some great people who are super transparent, but it's the nature of the beast. People want to believe this deal is going to work out. It's going to work out great for everybody. And so they'll tell you what you want to hear. They'll probably tell you what they want to hear. And so you need to ask for proof of some of these things. Have the borrower show you that they have the ability to repay. If this is a 6-month loan, how are they going to pay you those interest payments every month before this deal closes? Do they have a line of credit? Do they have other properties that are cash flowing? You know, how can they pay you back? What is their experience? We talked about that. What resources do they have in place? Do they have a team of contractors? Do they have a bank they work with to refinance properties if they're planning on, you know, keeping it as a rental? What do they need to do the deal successfully? What's up with the supply chain these days? Can they get the materials they need at the price at which they believe they can? All right, make sure those things are thought about. Always protect your capital. And if you're using somebody else's money, for goodness sakes, always protect their money. This is your reputation, your integrity. If you are investing somebody else's money and trying to make, you know, help them, then make sure you protect their capital above everything else. Then you protect your capital. And if that borrower does not have the ability to repay, then your capital and other people's capital is at risk. So you have flexibility. When you evaluate, you can look at all sources of income. Banks sometimes can't look at all sources of income, but we can as private lenders. And you should, look at all their sources of income. If they're self-employed, you need to understand where their cash flow comes from. Rule number 4, location, location, location. You need to know exactly where this property is located. You guys all know this. The location of a property influences the selling price, how quickly it sells, what type of buyer you might be getting in terms of their ability to qualify. You have to look at all these things. And I think I said here, 100 feet can mean the difference between $100,000 house or $1 million house. I don't know if you guys have been in neighborhoods where it's like that. You literally a half a block can make a difference in the value of a piece of property. When buyers are looking at houses to buy, so this flipper is getting ready to sell, what are their buyers looking at? They want to look at school district, access to transportation, churches, grocery stores. What's the crime rate? How walkable is the neighborhood? All these things. So look at the location carefully. The borrower must know the collateral. We talked about that. That's important. The borrower, if they're rehabbing it, they need to be able to tell you what their budget is and their scope of work. And here, I think it behooves you to have some knowledge in costs of construction. Take a contractor out to lunch, pay for their time to figure out what is the average cost to rehab a kitchen from ground up? What's the average cost to rehab a bathroom? Start creating these rules of thumb for rehab costs. And so when they tell you what a budget is and they give you a scope of work, do their numbers match up to their scope of work? Are they telling you this house needs a brand new roof and a full HVAC system and all new hardwood flooring, and their rehab budget is $10,000? Well, that doesn't make any sense, right? If they're telling you they just need to put lipstick on a pig and repaint some walls and a couple of little rooms of carpet, but their rehab budget is $50,000, that doesn't make sense either. So know their scope of work and find out if you think their budget matches. Rule number 6, the market, not the property, drives the price. You guys know this, you're real estate investors. Markets are dynamic. You want to look at the market in 90-day windows. Markets don't change in a week in real estate, but look quarterly. Look at those 90-day windows. Is this a buyer's market, a seller's market? Look at the demographics in these markets. Know when your flipper is going to sell to an end buyer, who are their potential lenders? What are the timeframes for turning around those types of loans? How many buyers will qualify for those types of loans? The more you can educate yourself about this stuff, the safer you're going to be as a lender, because you can evaluate the deal better. All right, in terms of market analysis, we'll go through this fairly quickly. Obviously, you want to investigate the city that you're looking at. That's the macro sort of market, the city, the region. Is it a buyer's or seller's market? You're going to look at the housing inventory. How many houses are on the market? If there are tons of houses, it's probably a buyer's market because the sellers they're flooded with houses. How many days on market is it sitting there? If a house is sitting there for a long time, it's not a seller's market. If the houses are flying off the shelves, so to speak, within 3 days after getting on the market, it's probably a seller's market. Compare your average sales prices to your listing prices. If a house is listed for $250,000 and sells for $300,000, it's probably a seller's market. If it's listed for $250,000 and sells for $199,000, it's probably a buyer's market. Pay attention to those types of data. So you're going to look on the macro level in the area and in the city, the demographics, the median age of the population, the overall economy, the job market. How vibrant is the city? Are people moving in or are people moving out? One of my friends, I think it's Dave Steck, looks at the U-Haul statistics. He literally drills down and finds out how many U-Haul trucks are going one way into what cities. That tells him what cities are hot at the moment, who's moving into those cities and how many people, right? So that's an interesting way to look at it, I thought. Now you get down to the micro market, the specific neighborhood the house is in. Look at that neighborhood. Are the roads good? Is transportation available? Are there good schools there, churches? What's the crime rate? All those things. Is this a more seasonal type of neighborhood or year-round neighborhood? You want to pick a growing market, a place that's growing, that's drawing people in. Rents can go up, housing prices can go up, things like that. You don't want to pick a dying neighborhood. Okay, This is just more stuff on the micro market. You want to run your numbers. You're going to look at the median listing price. What are the rental incomes? What are the rental rates in that area? Your occupancy rate. Can you set it up as a vacation rental? Is it a tourist draw there? Is it allowed to do vacation rentals there? You're trying to figure out what all the potential exit strategies are for this investment and what works in that area. So some resources for finding out some of this information. For vacation rentals, you can go to airdna.co, and it is .co, not .com. Mashvisor is one I've seen, National Association of Realtors. There are more if you just Google them, but find resources to analyze data. All right, rule number 7, what's more important, the market or the deal? Classic lawyer answer, it depends. In the down market, the deal is more important because you don't have time to wait it out if market values are dropping. You need to get that house, or your borrower needs to get that house sold right away. You don't have time to wait because the property value, your collateral is going down in value. In an up market, the market is more important because if the deal goes long but prices are going up, that's your friend, and it hides a lot of sins both in the deal and in the borrower. So you can have a deal that probably wasn't the best deal, but if the market is going up, it's probably going to save your bacon as a lender. So be aware of what the market is. Rule number 8, know your own limitations. Have multiple exit strategies to protect your capital and other people's money if you're using it. If the borrower's only exit is to fix and flip the house, then you have to make sure that the borrower has reserves and assets to pay you off at the end of the term if the property can't sell, or you have to be willing to take the property back. And then what are your exit strategies, right? You want to value that property in different ways, the sales approach or possibly income approach if it becomes a rental. You want to evaluate the impact to your financial situation if you become an accidental buy and hold investor. For instance, let's say you're using somebody else's money to buy this and you owe them their principal back in 6 months because you think that's when you're getting your principal back. But what if you don't get your principal back in 6 months? Do you have the assets to pay your underlying person off in 6 months or not? What is your financial situation going to look like if the borrower doesn't pay on time? How can you weather that crisis, that situation? All right, number 9, we talked about trust but verify, and sometimes we switch it to verify but trust. The word no can be your best financial planning tool. If you don't think this deal is right for you, pass. There will be more coming down the pike. And you do not want to take a deal if your gut tells you no, or the numbers don't work very, very well. If you do move forward, then make sure that you have vetted everything properly and that you have the right paperwork in place. And I think this is important as you get started. Hire an attorney to prepare that paperwork, or at least to review it. And every state's paperwork can be different on the lending. It doesn't take a whole lot of lawyer fees to get that paperwork drafted or reviewed, but it's important. And I'm blessed that I am my own attorney and I can do it. But if it's in another state, one I'm not familiar with, then I may sometimes hire a lawyer to look at that paperwork for me. Read everything. So many people just trust the paperwork they're sent. They don't read the words and they get themselves in trouble. So your paperwork needs to be rock solid. You need to know what it says word for word and make sure that when you sign on that dotted line, you are signing for things that you agree to. Rule number 10, follow a consistent and logical process to fund deals with consistent profit. We've talked about some of this. If the documentation is not accurate or not adequate, say no. If the information is more than 90 days old, have the borrower provide you new information. And if you like it, great, move forward. If you don't, say no. If the borrower says they're sourcing multiple lenders, I tend to say no because I'm putting time and effort into vetting this deal and making sure it works. And I'm marshaling my assets to get the capital together. And if that borrower goes with someone else, then I've lost that. So I want them, at least during the review process, to just work with me. And I will give them that benefit of reviewing it quickly, coming to my decision quickly. And if I say yes, that I will fund their deal, I will never leave them at the altar. I will go bend over backwards to make sure I fund that deal when I said I would fund that deal. I will never leave them high and dry. On the other hand, if you're a borrower and you tell a lender you're going to work with them, don't ever leave them at the altar. I have had a situation before where I had agreed to fund the construction of 3 houses. I literally had everything ready to go because we were supposed to close in a few days. I had liquidated stock, incurring capital gains taxes, all sorts of stuff. And I never heard from the borrower when it was time to close. And I reached out to him and I said, hey, when are we closing on that deal? And he said, oh, sorry, my best friend called last week and said he wanted that deal. So I just gave it to him. Well, that borrower had been courting me for a year to get me to trust them and lend to them. And guess what will never happen? I will never lend to them because that was a really crappy thing to do to me. And it actually caused financial harm to me. So don't do that if you're a borrower. All right, there are 4 stages of lending. You've got the pre-funding processes, the post-funding process, the payoff, and the post-payoff. So let's go through those quickly. And again, in issue of time, I am going fast, and I apologize for going so fast, but I want to make sure that we get as much of this done as possible. Let's see what my time is here. Okay, we don't have a whole lot of time. I'm just gonna go through these quickly and you can look at these slides again. I believe Tracy and Fred will make them available. We've already talked about this. I'm not gonna keep talking about the vetting of everybody because we've talked about that. So let me go through. We're just vetting the borrower, the collateral. Pre-funding process, you're gonna make sure the scope of work and the timeline is right. If you really want to, you can call the contractor. A lot of people don't do that, but you can make sure that everything is what the flipper says it is. You want to confirm the property. We've talked about that. You want to review all the title work, make sure that you know that there's clean title to that property when it's being purchased. You want to have a term sheet with the borrower that sometimes can just be as simple as an email, or it can be an executed contract where all the terms are laid out. You guys agree to the terms before moving forward. You want to verify that there's hazard insurance in place or will be in place when the house is purchased, that there's a lender's title policy. Is flood certification required? If you're working with your self-directed IRA, you've got forms from the custodian that need to be filled out. So anytime you're going into a loan and you're doing it through your self-directed IRA, add at least a week onto the timeline you think you need to fund that deal, because there's paperwork that needs to be done and we're at the mercy of the custodians. Sometimes they're fast and sometimes they're not, depends on how busy they are. So, and realize that the loan must be in the name of your IRA if you do it through an IRA. For instance, Quest Trust Company, custodian for the benefit of Mary Hart, IRA account number, blah, blah, blah. That would be how the title would read on the loan documents. Okay, so once everything's ready to go, you're going to wire the funds, or your IRA custodian will wire the funds if it's coming from your IRA. When you get wiring instructions, there is so much wire fraud right now. Never wire money without calling the person, and don't get the number off the wiring instructions. You've had other contact with these, say the escrow agent or the title company. Independently get their phone number, call the title company or whoever you're wiring the funds to, and confirm those instructions before you wire money. Not more importantly, but as importantly, when money is being wired back to you, require the sender to call you to confirm wire instructions. Because if it goes awry, you may never get your money back. Some people, and I don't have the leisure of doing this because I don't have any employees, but have dual controls. 2 different people look at the wiring instructions. I don't have that luxury. Make sure that the escrow agent got your funds and that all payoffs that were supposed to be paid got paid off before the money goes to the borrower. Once the funding has happened, you want to confirm that the borrower signed all the documents, that the funds made it to the escrow agent. We just talked about the payoffs. Once you have funded, make sure that all the signed closing documents get sent back to you, or copies of it. And you're going to have a promissory note, a deed of trust or mortgage, an assignment of rents. I like an investor certification and an affidavit of residency where my borrower certifies to me that the house they're buying is not their personal residence. They are buying it as an investor. That keeps my file complete in case anybody ever audits me to see whether I violated Dodd-Frank or the SAFE Act. I want to make sure that there's a lender's title insurance policy, a hazard insurance policy. If they're borrowing through an LLC or a trust, I want to see the organizational docs and I want to see a certificate of good standing. And I probably need to see a resolution for who has the authority to sign on behalf of that entity. All right, so if you're doing a rehab loan, we need to make sure that all parties know how the money is going to be dispersed for that rehab. Are you funding everything up front? If it's a small rehab, I will do that. If it's a larger rehab, then I want the flipper rehabber to request draws from me. And so I will have asked that flipper to create a draw schedule with scopes of work to be completed in each tranche. And that next draw gets done once the previous work in that previous tranche has been completed. I want to see evidence that it's been completed. I want to see lien waivers from the contractors that they've been paid for that work in the previous draw, so on and so on. Check with your borrower periodically for updates if they're not providing them. Ask them to send dated pictures of progress or videos, walkthrough videos. If you're a borrower, the best thing you can do is stay in massive contact with your lender. Keep up that feeling of trust that you're keeping them informed. Payoff process. When you're asked to give a payoff, you want to confirm the date of closing. Either review a payoff statement they've sent you, or better yet, prepare your own. I prepare my own payoff statements, and I prepare the total due through the anticipated date of closing. And then I always add a per diem amount, what interest I should be paid per day for every day after that if the loan doesn't close on time. Once you've received the money, then you can send back the original promissory note marked paid to the borrower, and you execute a release of lien that gets recorded in the Register of Deeds where that property is. And then the best part, you get more money back than you loaned out if everything goes well, but you want to make sure everything was done and finished. Ask the borrower if they have any additional needs, if you liked working with them. If you're trying to scale this up, ask for testimonials and referrals from your borrower. All right, using other people's money, there are two ways to do it. You can wrap somebody else's money, and in that situation, there's what we call an underlying lender. So you have a friend that doesn't know anything about this, and you're going to try to help him or her make some money. You can take their money, put it in the deal in a first lien position. You take your money and wrap around it in a second lien position, but you maintain control of the deal. That underlying lender gives you a durable power of attorney to manage the deal, foreclose if necessary, and all that. You're still in control. And you take a second position, and your underlying lender takes the first position. I'll show you an example of that in a few minutes. You can also go in where you co-loan with someone. Let's say right now I might be doing a loan with my brother. Maybe he's putting in 50% and I'm putting in 50%. We can do that either where we're both individually on the note and deed of trust, Mary Hart, John Hart, 50-50. We can put our money in a personal property trust together, and then the trust becomes a lender. We can put our money in an LLC together, and then the LLC becomes the lender. So there are a number of different ways to do it. You want to make sure if anybody's IRA money is involved, that you know the rules and that that's done correctly. We don't have time to go into that today, but just know there are specific rules when you're dealing with potentially disqualified parties loaning from your IRA. So the third way, which I forgot to put on here, is you can, if you get to a certain scale and sophistication, you can create a syndicated fund where you set up an LLC, and essentially you are raising money from investors, you're pooling all their money, and then you're loaning it out to the borrowers. And you as the company are taking a certain spread off the top. So maybe you've loaned it to borrowers at 12% annualized return. Your investors are making 8% annualized return, and you're keeping the 4% difference. So that's another way you can use other people's money, but that takes a level of sophistication, and it's quite expensive to set up those funds. All right, so here's an example of a wrap loan. And this example I did back in the day when you could easily get 15% in 5 points. That's harder to get now, but let's use it for the example. So let's say that I know a flipper who needs $50,000, and he is willing to pay 15% interest and 5 points, or 5% of the $50,000. He wants that money for 12 months. I said, that's great. It looks like a great deal. There's only one problem. I'm $45,000 short. I've only got $5,000. So what do? Well, let's say maybe my best friend is sitting there with $45,000 in a checking account making nothing. And I say to her, hey, Laurie, how would you like to make 10% on that money that's sitting in your checking account? She says, oh my gosh, that would be great. So we do a wrapped loan where my friend Laurie puts in $45,000, I put in $5,000. So when it's all paid off, the $2,500 in points goes to me as the wrap lender. The total interest that the contractor pays, the flipper pays, is $7,500. That's $50,000 at 15% for a year. But I paid to my friend Laurie $4,500 of that as her 10% share. So that means what's left to me is $5,500 in interest plus $2,500 in points. that is a 110% return because no, it's less than that. Hold on. Where is it? 110% return. Oh, I get 5,500 because I get 3,000 in interest and 2,500 in points. I get $5,500 back on a $5,000 investment. So I've made 110% yield on that loan. That's a wrap loan. Laurie would be in first position. I would be in second position. I would find the deal, vet the deal, babysit the deal, follow through with a foreclosure if it happens. And in exchange, I get the points and I get to keep that spread. And actually, these numbers aren't quite right because I forgot I'm earning 15% on my 2,500. So I would actually make even a little bit more. So this is just skewed a little bit, me trying to go too fast. Always my problem. All right, we don't have much time, so let's talk about some deals done right. This was a deal I did. You guys might know Wendy Sweet with Carolina Hard Money. Wendy's company was going into a first lien position on a large loan for some condos in Charlotte. And the borrowers needed a quick $300,000 to fund the deal. They were putting in a bunch of money. Carolina Hard Money was putting in a bunch of money. Wendy called me and said, hey, how do you feel about going in second position on this loan? It'll be relatively short term. In exchange, my borrowers are willing to pay 20% interest, 20% interest, and a $25,000 kicker at the end, basically points, $25,000 points. We agreed that the term would be 18 months, but they expected to pay it off much quicker. And in fact, they did. They paid it off in about 10 or 11 months. The revenue earned, and I used some of my money, some of a line of credit, and some of my children's investment money. So basically, after 18 months, after about 11 months, I got back $69,712.33 on a $300,000 loan. I had to pay some interest on my line of credit. So after I paid that interest on the funds that I had used from my line of credit, where I was paying at 6% and making 20+%, I netted $60,572.60 in payments. That was an annualized return of 26.51% and a cash on cash return of over 20%. That was a good deal. That was a great yield. I felt very confident going in second position for two reasons. One, it was behind Wendy Sweet, Bill Fairman, Carolina Hard Money. I knew they had vetted that deal up one side and down the other. I knew that they would communicate to me if there were any problems. I also knew based on the collateral that there was plenty of equity in this deal for everybody. So I felt comfortable with it. It worked out great. Another good done right. I did a loan, $118,000 out of my personal funds. Interest rate was 10%. I got 2 points at 23.60. Term of loan was 12 months. It ended up being extended to 18 months with no additional points. The loan needed to go further. I can't remember why now, it was a while ago. But in any event, so the actual months it was outstanding were 18. I earned $20,059.94. My annualized return was 11.33. So not a knock out of the park, but darn good and certainly solid. I look for 10% or more as an annualized yield, and I feel pretty good. My cash on cash return was 16.9. Now, if that deal had paid off in 12 months like it should have, my yield would have been higher. But because I did not charge any extension fees, I allowed this loan to be extended 6 months without charging additional fees or points. My yield went down, but it was a loan to a good friend of mine and I wanted to help her out. All right, the bad, a couple of bad ones here. Let's see, in this was one that had some hiccups. It ended up okay, not as good as it could have, but okay. So we had a $300,000 loan that I used $150,000 of personal money and $150,000 out of my line of credit. It was my first and so far only equity share deal. I was supposed to get 35% of the equity if it paid off on time, but we had escalators in the deal that if the loan went long, my share of the profit would go up. So depending on how long it took to pay off, I would get somewhere between 35 to 55% of the profit. However, one of the things I did in this paperwork that saved my bacon in the end is we also put in preferred minimum returns, dollar amount minimum returns. So I calculated based on the numbers the contractor was telling me, the flipper was telling me he thought the property would sell for and the money we'd have in it and so on and so on. I calculated what my yield would have been had it paid off on time at 35% profit. Based on the numbers the flipper gave me. He's the only one who understood the numbers because it was his deal. So I trusted him on those numbers. Well, for every month that went late, not only did my equity percentage went up, but my bare minimum dollar amount to be repaid went up. So when I calculated my yield at 35% based on the numbers he was telling me, I translated that to a dollar amount. And that dollar amount was the bare minimum I was going to get paid at the end of this project, regardless of how long it went. That dollar amount went up every month that the loan was late. This was a 4-month loan. The contractor wanted 3 months. I convinced him to at least take 4, tried to get him to do 6. He didn't agree. Well, it took 17 months to get that property sold, and it sold for a lot less than it should have. In any event, I'm not going to go through all the numbers. You can look at them, but the bottom line is, I was paying on my line of credit every month for 17 months. So I was out opportunity costs. I was out real dollars, but in the end, I should have gotten a huge return, 26.25% for that one deal. And had I been able to turn that money 3 times a year, it would have been 78%. But my actual return ended up, it shouldn't be a dollar sign down there, 8.6%. Wasn't horrible. I made money, but it was out for 17 months and I was paying a line of credit that whole time. So I had some serious opportunity costs. So that was a bad, not ugly yet, but a bad deal for me. Wasn't heinous, but not the best, not what I expected or hoped for. All right, couple of deals that turned ugly. Luckily, neither of these are mine. I haven't had any ugly ones yet myself. These are friends who've agreed to let me share their details. So, and unfortunately, both of these were with the same borrower, and I'm not going to name any names, but in any event, the loan amount on this one deal was $200,000. They were loaning to a nonprofit. It was a group of investors loaning to a nonprofit. The interest rate was 7%, no interest for 6 months, no points. They were trying to help this nonprofit. Then there were monthly interest payments, and I don't know the term of the loan. I'm guessing it was 6 to 12 months, probably more like 12 months. In any event, at some point, the borrower stopped paying interest. Work was never done on the property, is my understanding. Approximately 2 years and 11 months later, so we'll call that 3 years, the investors were able to get back 50% of their principal. So they lost 50% of their principal. They got no return on their money. So, and the only reason they were able to get that back is because of a very savvy investor who spent a lot of time trying to get that house sold on a short sale. So it's sold on a short sale for $110,000 of the $200,000 amount that was loaned, and a lot of time and headache involved, a lot of loss of trust, and absolutely no return. So we've got not only no return on that loan, but you've got the opportunity costs of what they could have made had they been paid off in time and reinvested that loan. So that was an ugly deal. This one is probably even uglier. Another friend of mine, they were loaned the same borrower a total of about $820,000 on 4 projects. And the borrower was trying to get, I think, another $250,000 or so, but the lender at that point realized there might be some problems. So of the 4 projects, basically 3 of them just stopped doing work and lied to the lender, saying everything was going on and everything was on time, and none of that was true. And the lender was out of state, so they didn't know at the time. They were getting fed information from someone they trusted that was lying. In any event, I'm not going to go through all of it, but the one deal they actually got $4,000 back on because they found out when a house was selling, and they intercepted the title company and basically demanded that they get paid by the terms of the deal, which the title company finally acquiesced to. And so on that deal, they made $4,000. On the other 3 deals, it took them, I think, 3 years of hell. They filed a lawsuit against the borrower. They finally were able to get back their principal, but it cost them $97,000 in legal fees to do it. So if you subtract the $4,000 they made from the $97,000 in fees, it cost them $93,000 and 3 years of hell on those loans. Why did that go ugly? Well, first of all, they had an untruthful borrower who now has been sued many times and has a big problem. Some of you might know who I'm talking about. And really, they trusted this person. The person's paperwork was set up in a way that was not protective of the lenders, and the lenders did not really understand that. I think they've learned a lot now. And there was just a lot of trust in the deal, and there was a lot of hyperbole on behalf of the borrower about how great this was going to be and things like that. And they got suckered, unfortunately. They have now spent their hard-earned money on those legal fees. mostly to try to hope that this will never happen to other people again by this borrower. So in any event, that's another one of the uglies. And I think we're about done here. So in the end, done right, private lending can be extremely prosperous, a really nice way to have a mostly passive source of monthly income. But you have to understand the deal, you have to understand the players, you have to understand the paperwork, and you must be diligent in your analysis of all of those things. And if you do that, you will go forth and prosper. And I don't let the ugly and bad stories turn you off. There are far, far, far more good stories if it's done right. So thanks so much and enjoy the rest of Cashflow Expo. See if I can end this.